Okay, let's see if that works. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to SerenityOS office hours. As usual, I don't trust that I clicked on the right thing, so I'm just going to wait for somebody to confirm that I can be heard and seen. This YouTube UI for live streaming is just like a slightly confusing. I'm live and heard. Okay, thank you everybody for confirming. So I can officially say, well, hello friends. It is the last day of 2021. So because it's a Friday, we're gonna do SerenityOS office hours. But because it is New Year's Eve, and because I have to also make the monthly update video, we're gonna have to do a bit of a shorter office hours today. So we're just gonna do a 1 hour instead of 2 hours as usual, just so I have time to finish the monthly update and stuff afterwards. Outside of that, nothing out of the ordinary. We're just gonna do what we always do and talk about SerenityOS. So if anybody has questions, technical, non-technical questions about SerenityOS, now is the time, as you know, and we can talk about anything. So nice to see people coming into the stream, despite today being New Year's Eve. Still a bunch of us slightly nerdy people sitting at home at the computer. So, I mean, of course, I would have to say Happy New Year to everybody, although it feels weird to say it before tomorrow. But Happy New Year, of course. Daniel says, Happy New Year, everyone. It's been an amazing year getting to know all of you and being involved in the project and the little yak hunts. Thanks for all the fun you've let me have. Happy New Year to you too, Daniel. And I am very happy that you have joined our project. You have made a lot of awesome things in the last couple of months. So like so many people have, and it's been a year of crazy growth for the SerenityOS project. We really have for as niche of a project as this is, we've really exploded in popularity, I would say, because it's a completely developer-centric software project, which makes no attempt to acquire non-technical users. And for such a project to still gain such momentum, it's absolutely amazing. And I'm so happy that so many people are joining us and having fun together with us. So super thanks to everybody, of course, who's been doing that. Elite Roger says, thoughts on Skift OS. So I don't really have any strong thoughts about it. I'm aware of it. It's, let me open up my Firefox. It's one of those hobby operating systems, right? And it's written in C++ as well. I haven't looked at it recently. It seems like it's been over a month since any commits happened. I know that Sleepy Monax, the person behind it, the original author, is working on something else nowadays. I think started building some other operating system together with some friend of his or something like that. I'm not exactly sure what they're doing, but I don't really have any thoughts about it outside of this because I'm not familiar enough with the project. Let's see. Carudo says, Happy New Year, Andreas. You are such an inspiration. Well, thank you, Carudo. Happy New Year to you too. And Linus is here. Hello, Linus, with a little wrench icon. Office hours and update video on the same day. Yeah, I know. It seems like an extremely stressful thing to do, and but I think it's going to be fine. Thankfully, I have people like yourself, Linus, who help me with the update video. So in the past, when I was making them all by myself, I don't think I would have try to stream on the same day, but things are different now. So that's very nice. Borsting89 says, I noticed that there is some porting of software to Serenity. I was wondering if you could explain what porting software is / means. As for a beginner in programming, I'm not 100% sure what goes into it. Right. So porting basically means taking an existing piece of software and then getting it to run on SerenityOS in this case, or getting it to run in a new environment. And in our case, when we port software to SerenityOS, we usually have to make, at the very least, we usually have to make a little tweak to the software that we're porting, just so that it will recognize the SerenityOS environment. And we often also have to make some little tweaks to SerenityOS itself, because every new piece of software that we try to run on SerenityOS usually, or quite commonly, exposes some area of like missing functionality or lacking functionality. So that's part of what makes porting so much fun, though, is that when you start porting something, you really don't know what kind of problems you're going to run into. Like you think that you're going to port some simple command line utility, but then it turns out that it uses Unix pipes in some interesting way, and then you have to go and work on the kernel to support that. And yeah, that can be really satisfying work when you get it going. And I have made a bunch of videos on my YouTube channel about porting. So I have them in a playlist called Porting Software to SerenityOS. So that's just a playlist of videos of me porting various pieces of software to run on the system. And each one of them encounters a totally different set of problems, and you get to see how I approach them. Of course, nowadays, other people do more ports than I do, because I've kind of lost interest in ports a little bit. So, but I do have a decent set of videos about that. Let's see. So MDL saying Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you too, MDL48. Happy New Year to you, Vesna. Let's see. Bleachko says, Happy New Year, everyone. Andreas, can you give a basic explanation of how sorting proxy model works? Sure. So sorting proxy model is sort of an in-between model. And let me use Vim to draw this, actually. So usually what you have is you have a GUI view. This is a widget. And then you want to display some data in that thing. So you plug in some kind of model into that view. And let's make this more concrete, actually. So let's say we have a table view, and then we have some kind of a model that provides the data for it. But by default, or most models are just dumb wrapper abstractions on top of a set of data. So you're just exposing some data that you want to display in a table view or in a tree view or whatever. But if you want to make that data sortable, so you can sort by specific columns, instead of having to teach every model subclass how to sort its internal data, we have this thing called a sorting proxy model. So what you do with that is that you, instead of attaching the model to the table view, you put a sorting proxy model here and attach your data model to the sorting proxy model. And then the data provided by this guy is then filtered through this thing, which then has some, the table view knows how to talk to this thing and knows how to make it sort by columns. And it's basically it's a reusable component that gives sorting abilities to any input model. That's how it works. And more concretely, like how it works internally is that it just has a mapping of indices. So it will remember. So say that you have a bunch of data, a bunch of indexes here. So I don't know, let's call this A. oh no, let's make this even simpler. So we have just one row, row 0 with 2 pieces of data, foo and bar, and then maybe after they are sorted by this guy, they would instead look like, wait, I'm not writing these out right. So this is the column number here. So let's put the row first. There we go. And then maybe they get resorted so that they look like this. Why am I? This was a very, very crude way of visualizing this, but so this is the sorting after you click on the sorting thing. And what happens here is that when you resort this guy based on some new criteria, it just takes the inputs and then creates a mapping and a reverse mapping for these indices to the sorted indices, and then those are then exposed to the table view. So the table view never knows anything about sort of the origin data model. It only knows about the sorting proxy model. And then there's a bunch of details about how hierarchies work, but let's move on to the next question for now. Let's see. Daniel is asking, are we going to see a live libjs/browser update from Linus? I don't know. Have to ask Linus. Linus has his own YouTube channel now, which is fantastic, I think, and I'm really happy about that. And I urge everybody to go and support Linus by subscribing to his channel and checking out his videos, just to encourage him to make more, of course. I think it's super awesome. It makes me extremely happy that I'm not the only person making these type of like real life hacking on SerenityOS videos, and very, very excited about Linus stepping into this world. And it would be amazing to see even more people do that next year, but no pressure. Let's see. James Pulio says, Happy New Year's. Having a login by my site has certainly improved my C++. I can't think of any personal or public projects without it. Thanks for the improved skill set. Cool. I am really glad to hear that. It's definitely been a year where a lot of people have brought sort of their personal itches to the project and started scratching them. And I think we are much better off now than we were in the past, because in the past sort of we had a bunch of people working on the system, but we didn't have so many people that all the little irritating things got exposed so quickly. And that's really changed in the last year. Like there's been such a lift of the entire system, I feel like, from so many people working on it at the same time. Very interesting effect. Elite Roger says, do you still think this UI skin is good for Serenity? Do you think a modernized look would be better? I think the Serenity UI is the Serenity UI, and I don't believe that a modern look would be better. I think new is not necessarily better. And in the case of contemporary modern UIs, I don't think they look good, and I don't really want to use them. So, but everybody feels differently, of course, and the system is themable, and it's gaining more theming abilities in some recent pull requests. So, who knows? But this definitely remains the default appearance, and I will make sure to maintain that it will always be able to look this way, unlike, for example, Microsoft systems, which just, you can't make your Windows look like this anymore, as I understand it. Let's see. Daniel says, regarding porting, we've had a PR for Qt ready to review. Okay, I thought Brian was looking into that one, but yeah, I can go take a look. Ronak says, do you use Vim key bindings or arrow keys? I use arrow keys, unless I'm in Vim, where I use Vim key bindings, but I find that they are about equally fast for me to use. Ryder Hitchhike says, sorting proxy model currently uses raw model indices. Someone should really get on that persistent model indices thing. Right. Someone is welcome to do that, of course. I would invite you yourself to take a look if you're interested. Zoneweld says, hi Andreas, can I ask what hardware you're using? I remember that I read somewhere that it's Intel NUC. So the hardware that I'm currently using is, I've shown this many times, but it's a hardware that was donated to me from people around the world. They sent me in this Reddit thread that was made by Charlie Horse 2 years ago. A bunch of people stepped up and sent me different computer components, and then I just assembled them into a computer. And yeah, here's a picture of the computer as it looks. And I used to use an Intel NUC, but I think that's sort of why people made this Reddit thread, was because the Intel NUC I was using was just getting excruciatingly slow, especially while recording at the same time. So upgrading to this proper machine has been super sweet. And I'm really, really grateful for all the people who sent me parts and helped out with getting that machine going. Aman says, Happy New Year, Andreas. What do you think about videos giving a high-level overview of how some Serenity applications work? For example, libjs. Yes, I think that would be a good idea. I already have a small library of videos in that vein, but I do want to expand it. So I have a playlist called Presentations right here, where I just go through like the architecture and a quick code tour of various system components. But it's been a long time since I did one of these. So like the ones that I have do need to be updated, I guess. And there are new topics like libjs, which I haven't covered at all in a video like this. So that would be a really good thing to do. So something to do in the new year, perhaps. Ecoptic says, I didn't expect you would do a stream today. I guess you never miss a day. I missed one day so far, but I'm gonna try to not miss days as much as I can, because I really like having this consistent thing happening once a week on a completely regular schedule, and it makes me feel like accountable to something, and gives me something to orient my week around. So as long as it's interesting and useful to people, I'm just going to keep doing it. If it stops being interesting, I would love to hear about that. And please do complain if these things are getting like really uninteresting or too repetitive, because then we have to switch up the format a little bit. I do have some new ideas for next year that I think people are going to really like. It will be very different from the things I've done so far, but I hope it will be very interesting, and it will still be related to programming, of course, and we'll see how that goes. But I don't want to say too much before I figure out exactly how it works. Oh, Yanis with a super chat saying, Happy New Year to both your real life family and also to the SerenityOS family. Thank you so much, Yanis. I really appreciate that. And Happy New Year to you too. And I love that you call it the SerenityOS family, because that is really how it feels like, to me at least. It feels like a funny family with hundreds of little cousins and nephews and nieces and uncles and aunts and stuff like that. And it's just a really a familial environment almost, right? Like I dig that. The SerenityOS family. Let's see. Giacomo says, Happy New Year. What do you think about LLVM? So LLVM, I don't have a very like, let's say, nuanced opinion about it because I haven't really worked directly with LLVM. My experience with it is using the Clang frontend to build C++ code, and that has been okay. It used to be a lot faster in the past compared to GCC and have nicer error messages than GCC, but I really feel like GCC kind of caught up at this point, and the advantage of Clang and LLVM appears to have shrunk in the last couple of years, but since I don't work on it myself, I can't really comment on its sort of, I don't know, innate qualities. But I hear good things about it. I remember hearing a lot about how hackable it was in the past, and I guess I do like that it's built out of these modules where you can sort of take LLVM and then write your own language front end on top of a mature backend. That seems useful, and I guess that's how a lot of new languages that happen these days, like Rust and Zig. Zig started out with an LLVM backend, at least. I know now they're building their own backend, but it seems like a net good thing that LLVM exists. So I guess I'm happy about that. Marco says, hi, how does the Serenity team handle noob code contributions? For example, not freeing memory. So we get noob and expert code submissions all the time. That's fine. If you make a mistake in your PR, then ideally somebody notices and points it out. But mistakes happen sometimes and they get slipped into the code. We eventually notice and fix it, but it's like any other software project. Bugs are a reality, and they happen, so it's not the end of the world. But when it comes to something like not freeing memory, it's pretty hard to leak memory in our style of C++ that we use. You have to do some pretty unusual things in order to leak memory, and because you have to do unusual things, people usually notice in code review if you do something like that. But unless you started learning C++ last week, you're definitely welcome to work on the system. But if you are literally a noob, that you haven't been doing this for long at all, I think it would be more productive for everyone if you worked on something smaller at first until you got more comfortable with the language. Susie Bros says, when the time is ripe, will you make hacking videos hacking from inside native Serenity on bare metal? Yes, of course. Kyle Williams says, guys, the GUI being retro is the point. I guess so. Indeed, it's part of the point for sure. But it's not, from my perspective, it's not about retro, but rather it's about being really strong GUI, like a really good GUI. And in my personal biased opinion, the late 90s, early 2000s GUI was extremely expressive, well thought out, and to the point. And so I want to bring that GUI back and then iterate on that and try not to screw it up like people did last time when they were here, because I feel like we've learned a lot about these things in the last 20 years. And if we just make some different strategic choices, like, for example, we say no to the idea that the desktop has to support touch input, for example, as a primary input device, then I think we'll end up somewhere totally different that maybe hasn't been seen before. And it will be interesting to find out what that is. Let's see. James Pulio says, regarding system, just got filters, colorblind specifically, and a PR is in place for rounded corners and related, I believe. Right. Yes. And I think it's really cool that these color blindness tweaks are in the system so that you can adjust the colorization to make it easier for somebody with color blindness to to differentiate between UI elements and stuff like that. That's super cool. And I'm a big fan of accessibility, but I also don't really know much about it. So I take the things I'm aware of and I try to accommodate them, but really I just have a lot of blind spots in that area. Sorry about the pun. Let's see. Liter says, where do you draw the line as to creating systems and just implementing specs as the browsers, for example? Do you think creating systems is funner? Well, I don't know if I draw a line. Maybe there's a line. I think the line I would draw is, I think it's better to implement the web than it is to try to convince the whole world that they should use our web protocol and our markup language and our scripting language. I think it's better to implement JPEG and PNG than it is to come up with their own image formats and try to convince the world to use them, right? But for anything that's not related to data interchange or like interacting with remote systems, I think we're free to do whatever we want locally. And for any local, like totally locally contained thing, I prefer that we come up with our own stuff. But I don't think creating our own things is funner than implementing specs. I think both are equally fun, just in very different ways. Let's see. James Pulio, can't believe that systems donations thing was 2 years ago. Yeah, that's pretty wild. We've been doing this for a long time now, going on 3 years plus, and the community is healthier than ever. This YouTube channel keeps growing, and I feel like I personally am still growing, just in ways that I wasn't really expecting, and it will be interesting to see what happens in the next year, and what kind of stuff we come up with to challenge ourselves, because we've got a decent foundation in place now, I would say, and there's a little bit of a mentality shift needed, I feel, at least for me personally, towards like accepting that the foundation is like somewhat solidified and starting to improve on things and refine and of course iterate. But it seems to me that like we don't need to lay down large parts of foundation anymore, at least not as often. And yeah, I don't really know what the outcome of that is. I think some people find it less fun when there's less low-hanging fruit. I enjoy medium-hanging fruit and high-hanging fruit, but it's something I've talked about before on office hours, that it's not that it worries me, but I'm curious to see how it affects people and what it does for new people coming in. Like, will new people still be as eager to join if once we pick all the low-hanging fruit? Who knows? That bastard over there disappeared in the scrolls. Said, I like the way that Serenity exposes its innards, somewhat like Temple OS. Right. It seems like a good way to encourage participation. Do you have any ideas for how to expand this aspect of Serenity? So something that comes up every now and then is documentation. And it's usually somebody asking, where's the documentation? Or I want to write documentation, somebody says, and then they don't do it. But I think that sort of goes with the idea of the foundation solidifying, because I've always said that once the foundation solidifies, we can start documenting it without having to worry that that, you know, we write all this documentation that we have to throw away because somebody decides to rewrite a large part of the system. And I think that's an area where you can greatly improve people's understanding of the system. And This is also an area where I personally have blind spots because I have a fairly good and not entirely complete, but like really good understanding of the system, right? So it's harder for me to tell which parts are harder to understand, let's say. Yeah, that's something I could see improving that. But I don't know how we'll do it. But it seems like maybe we're getting closer to the day when that type of stuff starts. Ecooptic says, I had an idea that if you have IDEs and language servers, would it be viable to maybe skip some checks in the compiler since you're doing checking in the IDE? Well, I guess in a beautiful, perfect world where you have an IDE that talks to, for example, like my Sea Lion here on Linux, which is talking to ClangD and uses ClangD to inform me about little things that it doesn't like about the code. In a perfect world, those two would talk to each other and hand over any information that has already been figured out in the IDE context can be like handed directly to the compiler. But I imagine that just getting all that infrastructure to talk to each other, it might be tricky, but yeah, it's an interesting idea. And ideally, you would have the IDE expose all the issues before you even run the compiler. And then running the compiler would be sort of, all the checks have already passed, so now you just have to, compile and do all the optimization passes and so on. But I don't know. I'm not super knowledgeable about how those types of things are implemented because I never really built or worked on a mature language, mature compiled language. Let's see. Luca Spinotti says, I'm looking into source tree for Serenity, and it seems to be able to boot multi-boot with grub and boot raw first sector into hex 7C00. Which does it use by default? Why do you have both? We use multi-boot. We boot with the multi-boot protocol, and I don't know exactly what it would mean to boot raw, but I don't think that would work because we rely on the multi-boot protocol to tell us about physical memory layout and things like that. So without the multi-boot metadata that we get from the bootloader, we could not continue booting the kernel. Krister Lind says, cling and chill on New Year's. Doesn't get much better than that. Happy New Year to you, Krister. Thank you very much for that. For that happy, well-wishing statement. Let's see. Hello, Paul. How's it going? Sam Bauman says, Happy New Year, everyone. I was wondering if you could demystify some of the core object construction and registration magic. Many objects inherit from core objects, so I think it's something worth understanding, probably. Right. Yes. So core object is sort of the base class object of all of our GUI classes, or all of our GUI widgets, and also a bunch of other things. And essentially, a core object is meant to be an object that can receive events from an event loop. So libcore has core object, and it also has core event loop and core event. And the original and main purpose of core object is just to receive events, and they come into this virtual void event. So they arrive here, and then they get forwarded to various virtual functions that can then be overridden in subclasses and so on. And core object is exists in a tree, and that's primarily to facilitate natural construction of hierarchical interfaces in the GUI. So usually a GUI is made up of some kind of hierarchy. So you would have something like a GUI window, which then has a GUI widget, which is sort of the main widget for that UI. And then maybe inside there you have a horizontal splitter, and then maybe inside that thing you have you know, something on the left and something on the right. Let's put something more interesting here, like a table view and maybe a frame that then has something else inside of it, and so on. And all of these guys inherit from core object, and core object lives in a tree like this, and that's why it has stuff like children and parents and so on. And then they have one more thing, which is that they have what we call properties. And properties are things that you can access via GML. So if we run our GML playground thing here, we can add a button, and then we want to set some text on that thing, like hello. So text here is a property, and it's a core object property. And if we go and look at GUI button CPP, or maybe it's an abstract button, which is the base class of that guy. Yeah, so we can see that GUI abstract button has a string property called text. And when you try to get it, it will call this function. When you try to set it, it will call this function. And so this is a way to expose various C++ properties so that they can be accessed by name from GML, or the GUI markup language. And there's like a billion things we can say about it, but those are sort of the main things to know about. There are some interesting design flaws in the core object system, or the main one that I dislike at the moment is the fact that these properties here are per instance. So as you can see, when we construct an abstract button object, we register properties here, and the fact that they're in the constructor should clue you in that registration happens on a per instance basis. So every core object has to go through this process in construction of like re-registering or registering all of its known properties. And they live in this big hash map here called mProperties, and some GUI widgets have a large number of properties, and it takes time to actually register all of them. And I think it would be an interesting architectural change to move towards something maybe more like JavaScript prototypes or something like that, so that the abstract button class here, it wouldn't register all of these properties when you construct each instance, but rather it would just say, oh, my prototype is the abstract button prototype. And then at some point you've informed the system that the abstract button prototype has these properties. But that's something that remains to be tried and implemented, or prototyped, if you will. Anyways, that's some things about core object. Let's move on to more questions. Let's see. Mustafa says, Happy New Year from your SerenityOS nephew. Happy New Year to you, Mustafa. I haven't seen you hacking on Pixel Paint recently, but I'm sure you will find a reason to do that sooner or later. Hedge Chasing says, Happy New Year. I was wondering if there are any good resources for learning about the ACK standard library. Seems better than the STL, but I don't know where to start to learn all of its features. So there isn't really like a resource where you can learn about this other than just interacting with the SerenityOS codebase. And really, I think that's how everybody has learned it so far, because it's the only option. And that's still what I would recommend, to just hack on any of our programs or libraries and just try to fix a bug or something. And you'll very quickly, once you get used to the way we name things, you'll pretty quickly find that you can sort of intuitively guess what things are going to be called, because it's largely consistent throughout the system. And that's when the real power kicks in, because once you learn the naming scheme, you'll start finding the name quickly, and you can just like type a few letters and then let the IDE auto-completion figure out the rest for you. But really the best thing to do is start by just hacking on something in the system. Let's see. Piotr Borowski says, what was your college/university experience? Do you think that things you learned there were worth it? I never went to college or university. I did not even finish high school. I left before completing the last year of high school. Let's see. James Pulio says, making videos while programming sounds a bit daunting to me. Every small mistake I would make would look silly. Besides, I work with Logom, not on Serenity. How was your start with videos? So my start with videos, you can see on this channel. You can go back and look at my first videos, and if you go and do that, you will find somebody who was a lot less comfortable programming on video than I am now, and I was messing up a lot, or like freezing up in the brain, couldn't think of how to do basic things. I think in my very first video, I struggled with printing out a number in octal mode. Spent like 10 minutes trying to figure out how to do that. And it's funny because at the time, I felt like I was doing okay. But it's only now that I've improved so much that I can go and look at that and see, oh, well, that was actually not that great. And that's, I think, basically, if you start doing something regularly, you will improve at it. And you'll eventually get to a point where you can have the satisfaction of looking at your old recording and just recognizing that you got so much better. And if you never record yourself, you'll never get that satisfaction. So for that reason alone, I almost recommend it. It's a bit like if you want to lose weight or something like that, then you start to record how much you weigh every day or every week or whatever, because once you are able to see the data and you can see like that graph going down, it becomes real, sort of. Whereas if you were not gathering the data, then it's almost more like an emotional, abstract thing that changed, and it's harder to appreciate, at least in my opinion. Jean-Baptiste says, hi Andreas, have you tried booting or even dogfooding SerenityOS on your spare NUC? I have tried, but it doesn't boot it. It has a bunch of issues with the, I think we would need USB keyboard support, and also it has an NVMe drive, although I know that NVMe has recently been happening for Serenity, but I haven't tried booting on the NUC for over a year, so it might be time to bust it out and see how it fares. Let's see. Vesna says, Happy New Year too. New beginning and all the best. Just this. Does the song Talk Hard have a studio version? I can't find. Talk Hard. Does that have a studio version? Let's see. Now we are suddenly looking into things. Talk Hard song by Stan Ridgway. Sure. I don't know if that has a studio version. Seems like maybe that's a live thing. Oh, wait. What's going on here? The lost studio recording of Talk Hard from Pump Up the Volume. I'm just going to link to the tweets. I'm not going to click on the suspicious link here, but yes, investigate at your own peril. Let's see. Paul says, LLVM was the initial way to create compiled JS for the browser VM with Emscripten and native client code. All right. James says, on the point of code submissions, I hope no one fears it. I've done a few dumb things, but always helped along with other developers. Right. Don't worry about submitting code that that isn't like perfect, because that's why we look at each other's code. And that's why like it's not forbidden to participate just because you are a newcomer or because you are not as experienced as some other people. This instead, you're invited to participate so that we can share our knowledge that we have and help you improve faster. So don't worry about it. Let's see. Suvadeep says, will 2022 be the year of Serenity? I guess we'll see. We will see. Ramon says, what time is it there? It's 4:45 p.m. So, afternoon, I guess, or very early evening. And I'm gonna have to wrap it up here in 10 minutes or so because I have a bunch of things to do, including the December monthly video. But let's take a few more questions, of course. Let's see. Krishna says, have you considered Rust for Serenity due to its memory safety and the ownership borrowing system? I have considered many things, but no plan exists for using any other language at the moment. Lebster says, I know this has been asked before, but where does Serenity transition from assembly to C++ when booting? So we currently boot into this thing called a pre-kernel. And we end up here in boot.s. So if you look at the path up here, it's Serenity, kernel, pre-kernel, arch, x86, boot.s. And basically the multi-boot bootloader throws us into the start function, wherever it is. Real start. It throws us into this guy here. This is where we enter from multi-boot, and then this thing then calls into the C++ code after setting up the initial page tables and the initial global descriptor table and stuff like that. So then we end up, after that, we call into the pre-kernel init CPP, and we end up here in this function. So this guy calls init eventually after loading the page tables and setting up the descriptors. Then it calls to this guy. So that's where the transition happens. Kyle Davis says, have you ever felt like your skills were not growing? Sure. Yes, absolutely. And I felt like I was stagnating for a long time when I was doing the bare minimum and focusing on other stuff instead. And especially when I was focusing on things like doing drugs, getting drunk, partying, if you will. When I was doing those things, my skills were not growing at all. And it's possible that they were actually getting worse. Yeah, they didn't grow. I think I was just stuck, and I was doing the things I knew how to do, but I was very careful to not try anything that I might fail. And that was sort of 10 years ago. This was how I was acting in my career or whatever, that I tried to avoid having to get into any situation where I might fail at a task. So I was making sure that anything that I agreed to do would be something I couldn't screw up. And that was a really stagnating attitude. But at the time, it just seemed like a really smart thing to do, because if I can only succeed, then things will just be really great. It's funny how you can think something like that and it seems so reasonable at the moment. But of course, I understand now that by not challenging myself and putting all my energy towards sort of hedonistic pursuits in my free time, that was just a recipe for stagnation/regression. And that definitely happened. Let's see. Giacomo says, do you have any idea of what it would take to support UEFI boot? I haven't looked into that personally, but I'm sure that the people in the kernel channel on our Discord would know, or maybe in the bare metal channel. I've seen it. It's a subject that comes up from time to time. And if you're interested in working on it, I'm sure that somebody could tell you, you could at least learn what we already know and use that to take the first steps. Let's see. The Liquid Edit says, does SerenityOS use GDT trick to get into protected mode? Just learned about it in university. I don't know what the GDT trick is, but we are already in protected mode when control is transferred to us from the bootloader, because we use the multi-boot protocol. So we don't actually do the we don't jump to from real mode to protected mode ourselves. We used to have a bootloader that did that. The original bootloader I wrote many years ago, which actually loaded Serenity off of a floppy. The kernel used to be on a floppy, and then we had a bootloader on the floppy that would then load the kernel and then load the file system from the hard drive and then boot up that way. It was really convoluted. That thing did a basic protected mode enabling stuff, but since we switched to using multi-boot, we haven't had that. Valdecir Santos says, any tips/path to start with C++? I'm not really the right person to answer that question because I haven't started with C++ in a very long time. So I would encourage you to just use the power of Bing and just Bing it, like learn C++. If you are familiar with another language, I would maybe make some search queries like C++ for JavaScript developers, C++ for Python developers, something like that. But really, I can't really give a good answer because I haven't been where you are ever, really, because I got started with these things before I even had internet access. So the way I approached being a beginner was totally different and like doesn't make sense today because, you know, I'm not going to tell you to go to the library and get every book about C++. Because I think that's pretty much guaranteed to not be the optimal approach. Adrian says, was your patch to Natalie Ruby accepted? It was. Let's go look at it. That would be 7.1m's Natalie project. And my pull request has been closed. And I don't remember what I called it. What the heck did I call it? I feel like it was here. Less integer hydration. Yes, 23 days ago. So it's been a while now, but it was merged, as you can see here. Oh my goodness, look at all the people who clicked on the little party icon. That's funny. Yes, it was accepted. Let's see. Mati says, can you add login sound like that in Windows XP? So I haven't added any login or logout sounds to SerenityOS or anything like that, any kind of UI sounds, because I would go completely crazy if I had to listen to those 100 times every day. But it's certainly something that could be added and would be interesting if we end up doing something more like a release version of the system. And then it would also make sense to maybe have like a welcome screen, like, oh, welcome to Serenity. This is your first time booting, la la la, this and that. In that type of environment, I could see sounds making sense. But when you're developing and you reboot the system hundreds of times in a day, you don't want to hear the little sound because you will just hate it. Let's see. Clinton Programs says, how do you choose when to use what kind of lock in the kernel? It seems like spin locks are used a lot in the kernel, but not in user space. Why is this? So, well, basically, we try to use spin locks for short data accesses where we don't need to block. And we use a mutex if we may need to block the thread. So I guess the way I think about it in very simplified terms is that, like, if I'm competing with another CPU for access to a resource, then I'll use a spin lock. If I'm competing with another thread for access, then I will use a mutex. I guess that's a very simplified explanation. But basically, mutexes have the power that they can block. So if somebody else is holding the mutex, we can call lock, and our thread will just go block until the other guy is finished with the mutex and releases it so we can grab it. When you're using a spin lock, we cannot block by definition because it's a spin lock. Ecoptic says, we are in the same time zone, Andreas. Well, hello there, fellow time zoner. Edledu81 says, do you have any plans to release Axe standard library as a standalone library? If you are not interested, do you care if someone does a fork of it? I absolutely do not care if somebody does forks of parts of SerenityOS. We are using the 2-clause BSD license, which means that you can do almost whatever you want. And I would just be happy if people find use for our code base or parts of our code base. Personally, I don't have any plans to release any kind of standard library standalone thing. But if somebody else wants to do that, by all means, go for it. Supernova says, is there a LibreOffice alternative for SerenityOS? And if not, can it be ported? There are no rich text editing or office productivity programs other than Spreadsheet in development currently for SerenityOS. You can certainly port LibreOffice if you want to, and I would encourage you to attempt it if you're interested. But I would also, I have a small interest in building a rich text editor at some point, although not today, but eventually it would be a nice component to have for the system. So one step at a time, that is probably something that will happen eventually. James Pulio says, you've expressed your fondness for quality of life and polish changes often. What are areas of the system, in code or visual, that are much more appealing or easier to use than previously? Oh, well, I guess my favorite quality of life change from this year probably is going to be the settings here. I really like that we now have settings for all applications collected in a single place. So if you just want to edit the settings for anything, you can probably find it here. And the idea I had for this was really from cell phones like iOS, where you have the settings, and that you just go to settings to edit all settings instead of like having to find the settings icon in each app, because every app could like put the settings in a different place. So you just bypass that usability problem by collecting all the settings here. I feel like this is such a nice thing. And oh, am I dropping frames? It's my frame thing, my streaming thing started complaining that I'm losing the connection, but hopefully I am still here. Let's see. Ecoptic says, a friend of my dad wants to give me a book about Pascal. I think a lot has changed fast in programming. I would say so. Yeah, absolutely. But I read a book about Pascal once in the summer when I was a kid, and it was a good time. Let's see. Oh, shoot. It is 5 p.m. And yeah, as I said, I'm going to have to cut it short today because I have to make the monthly update video, and then it is New Year's Eve, so I have to do New Year's Eve things. But I do want to thank everybody for coming and dropping in on this last evening of the year. Thank you very much, and Happy New Year to everybody, of course, in advance, or depending on where you are. It's been a fantastic year for me for the SerenityOS project, and I'm so happy that you've all been here with me through this process, and that you continue to take an interest and come to the streams and hang out in the video comments, and it's just awesome. So oh, hey Dan, Happy New Year to you. Good to see you. Yeah, so we'll cut it off here. I'm gonna go make a monthly update video. So Happy New Year, everybody, and I will see you all next time. Bye.